Millionaire came for a routine medical checkup, shocked to see his ex as the doctor while her daughter played in the clinic. "Hi, my beautiful family. It's your Mr. Peter. And if today is your first time here, you're already home. This isn't just a channel, it's a place where hearts are held, where every word is written to love you back. Before we begin, let me whisper this small prayer over your life, soft, tender, and full of everything I wish for you. May your heart be wrapped in comfort like a warm blanket. May your tears, both past and hidden, be kissed by peace. May love visit you, not in noise, but in quiet moments you didn't expect. I pray the pain you carry becomes lighter with each breath, that the world feels a little safer today and your soul remembers you are more than enough. You are loved, you are needed, you are a miracle walking. Now, my sweet and beautiful family, please don't leave this story unfinished. It isn't just a tale. It's a part of me written for you. And if you feel something when it ends, I ask from my heart, please rate this story out of 10 in the comments. Not for numbers, but for love, for connection. If you don't, I'll quietly mind, because your voice matters deeply. Like this video, leave a gentle word. Share it with someone who needs light today. Let's remind the world that love still lives here, in this family's, in every line, in every heart that stays. Let's begin the story. With all my love, always.
7 years, 3 months, and 16 days. Alan Hubler could have calculated it down to the hours, the minutes, even the seconds since he'd last seen the woman who haunted his dreams and turned his $150 million empire into meaningless numbers on a screen. He never expected to see her again, especially not here, in the pristine corridors of Riverside Medical Center, where the scent of antiseptic couldn't mask the lingering perfume of regret that followed him everywhere. The universe, it seemed, had a twisted sense of humor about timing. Alan's pulse raced as he stood frozen in the doorway of the cardiology wing, his breath catching like a teenager seeing his first love. There she was, Dr. Natasha Davis, according to the nameplate that gleamed like a beacon of everything he'd lost. Her back was turned to him, white coat flowing like silk over curves that had once fit perfectly against his chest, her natural hair pulled back in a style that somehow made her look both professional and devastatingly beautiful. Time collapsed. The successful tech mogul worth $150 million dissolved into the 28-year-old fool who'd walked away from the only woman who'd ever made him feel truly alive. His Italian leather shoes, worth more than most people's rent, felt like concrete blocks anchoring him to this moment of reckoning. "Mr. Hubler?" The receptionist's voice seemed to come from underwater. "Your appointment is ready." But Alan couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stare at the woman who'd once whispered that she'd love him forever, right before he'd proven that forever was a luxury he couldn't afford. Then Natasha turned around. The clipboard in her hands clattered to the floor, the sound echoing through the quiet wing like a gunshot. Her eyes, those deep, intelligent brown eyes that had once looked at him like he hung the moon, widened in shock, then narrowed with something that might have been pain or anger or the dangerous combination of both. Alan. His name fell from her lips like a prayer and a curse wrapped in velvet. Natasha. He'd spoken her name 1,000 times in his dreams, but hearing it aloud felt like swallowing glass and honey simultaneously. For a moment the world held its breath, the soft hum of medical equipment, the distant chatter of nurses, the gentle tick of the wall clock, all of it faded into background noise as 7 years of silence stretched between them like a chasm neither knew how to cross. She was even more beautiful than his memories had painted her, if such a thing were possible. Success had settled on her like a crown, the confidence in her posture, the way she held her chin, the intelligence that sparkled in her eyes despite the shock. She'd achieved everything she'd dreamed of, become the doctor she'd always wanted to be, and Alan felt a surge of pride mixed with devastating regret. "Mama, I finished my picture." A small voice piped up from the corner of the waiting area, and Alan's world tilted on its axis. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, bounced up from a child-sized table covered in coloring books and crayons. She had Natasha's warm brown skin and graceful movements, but something about her made Alan's chest tighten with recognition. The shape of her face, the way she tilted her head when she looked up at her mother, the dimple in her chin that appeared when she smiled. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," Natasha said, her voice strained as she knelt to examine the drawing. But her eyes kept darting back to Alan, watching him piece together the truth written in every line of the child's face. "Is this the patient, Mama?" the little girl asked, studying Alan with unabashed curiosity. "He looks worried. Are you going to help him feel better?" The innocence of the question hit Alan unexpectedly. Help him feel better? If only it were that simple. If only the damage he'd done to himself could be healed with medicine and time. "Rahama, go back to your coloring, please," Natasha said softly but firmly. "Mama needs to work." Rahama. Even her name was beautiful, unique, and melodic like her mother. Alan watched as the little girl skipped back to her corner, humming a tune he didn't recognize, and felt something shift in his chest. She was perhaps 5 or 6, with Natasha's graceful movements and warm brown skin, but something about the way she tilted her head when concentrating reminded him of someone else entirely. "We should get started," Natasha said, her professional mask sliding back into place with practiced ease. "Mr. Hubler, if you'll follow me to examination room 3. The formality in her voice stung worse than any slap could have. "Mr. Hubler." As if they were strangers, as if he hadn't once known every inch of her skin, every dream she'd ever whispered in the dark, every way to make her laugh until tears streamed down her cheeks. Alan followed her down the hallway, his eyes drawn to the sway of her hips, the confident click of her heels, the way she held herself like she owned the world. She'd grown into her power, become the woman he'd always known she could be. Without him. The examination room was small, intimate despite its clinical sterility. Natasha busied herself with his chart, her movements precise and professional, but Alan could see the slight tremor in her hands, the way she avoided looking directly at him. "Please have a seat on the table," she said, finally meeting his gaze. "I'll need to listen to your heart and lungs, check your blood pressure." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. She was going to listen to his heart, the heart that had been broken and empty for 7 years, the heart that had just started beating again the moment he'd seen her face. "Natasha, Dr. Davis," she corrected sharply, then softened slightly. "Please, let's keep this professional." Alan nodded, understanding the boundary she was trying to establish, even as everything in him screamed to reach for her, to apologize, to beg for the chance to explain what had happened all those years ago. He shrugged out of his jacket and rolled up his sleeves, hyper-aware of every movement, every breath. When Natasha approached with her stethoscope, he caught a whiff of her perfume, something floral and warm that made his head spin with memories of lazy Sunday mornings and tangled sheets. "Deep breath," she instructed, and he obeyed, trying to focus on anything but the way her fingers felt through his shirt, the way her proximity made his pulse race. "Your heart rate is elevated," she observed, her voice carefully neutral. "I wonder why," he murmured, and saw her jaw clench. She completed the examination in silence, her touch professional but gentle, and Alan found himself memorizing every second of it. The way she bit her lower lip when she concentrated, the small furrow between her brows, the way she unconsciously held her breath when she listened to his heart. "Everything appears normal," she said finally, stepping back and removing her stethoscope. "Your blood pressure is slightly high, but that could be situational stress." Situational stress. That was one way to put it. I'll need you to come back next week for some additional tests, she continued, scribbling notes in his chart. Blood work, an EKG, stress test, standard procedure for someone with your lifestyle. My lifestyle. For the first time since he'd entered the room, she looked directly at him, and he saw fire in her eyes. High stress, high stakes, high everything. The kind of life that puts career above all else. The words hung in the air between them like an accusation, a reminder of every choice he'd made that had led him away from her. Natasha, Dr. Davis, she corrected again, but there was less conviction in it this time. I never forgot, he said quietly, the words pulled from the deepest part of his soul. Not for a single day. She stared at him for a long moment, something vulnerable flickering across her features before she locked it away again. I'll have the receptionist schedule your follow-up appointments, she said, her voice steady despite the storm in her eyes. Take care of yourself, Alan. She turned to leave, but paused at the door, her hand on the handle. She's 6, she said without turning around, in case you were wondering. And with that, she was gone, leaving Alan alone with the weight of everything unsaid and the devastating mathematics of lost time. Outside, he could hear Rahama's voice asking her mother if the sad man was going to be okay, and Alan closed his eyes, wondering the same thing himself. Chapter 2. Professional Boundaries. The silence in examination room 3 stretched like a taut wire ready to snap, each second that ticked by on the wall clock marking another heartbeat of the life Alan had walked away from. His hands, which commanded boardrooms and closed million-dollar deals without trembling, betrayed him now as he rebuttoned his shirt. She's 6. The words echoed in his mind like a mantra of regret. 6 years old. 6 years of birthday parties he'd missed, bedtime stories he'd never read, scraped knees he hadn't kissed better. 6 years of his daughter growing up without knowing her father existed. The door creaked open, and Natasha stepped back inside, her professional composure intact but fragile, like expensive china held together by sheer will. She carried a folder thick with forms and test requisitions, but Alan noticed the way her fingers gripped the edges too tightly, the slight flush that colored her cheeks, despite her attempt at clinical detachment. I've scheduled your follow-up appointments, she said, settling into the chair across from him with deliberate distance. Blood work tomorrow at 9, EKG on Wednesday, and the stress test Friday morning. The lab results should be ready by... Natasha. Her name escaped his lips like a prayer he'd been holding for 7 years. Please, can we talk? Really, talk? She looked up from the papers, and for a moment, the carefully constructed walls around her heart seemed to waver. In her eyes, he saw flashes of the woman who used to curl up against his chest on Sunday mornings, who laughed until she snorted at his terrible jokes, who once told him she wanted to have his babies someday. There's nothing to talk about, Alan. But her voice betrayed her, rough around the edges like sandpaper on silk. You're my patient. I'm your doctor. That's where this begins and ends. Does it? He leaned forward, desperate to close the distance between them, not just physically but emotionally. Because last time I checked, patients don't usually make their doctor's hands shake. Natasha's gaze dropped to her trembling fingers, and she quickly clasped them together in her lap. You're imagining things. Am I? Because I remember what you look like when you're trying not to cry, and right now, don't. The word came out sharp, defensive. Don't you dare psychoanalyze me. You lost that right 7 years ago when you disappeared without a word. The accusation hit him like a physical blow, and Alan felt the familiar weight of guilt settle on his shoulders. I know. God, Natasha, I know. If I could go back and change everything. But you can't. She stood abruptly, pacing to the small window that overlooked the medical center's garden. You can't change the fact that I called you for 3 weeks straight after you left. You can't change the fact that your phone went straight to voicemail, that your apartment was suddenly empty, that you vanished like I'd never mattered at all. Alan's throat constricted. He remembered those calls, had listened to every voicemail she'd left, each one more desperate than the last. But he'd been drowning in the demands of his startup, convinced that answering would only make leaving harder for both of them. You mattered, he said quietly. You mattered more than anything. That's why I had to go. The investors, they wanted everything from me. Every waking moment, every ounce of energy. I couldn't give you the life you deserved while building the company. Natasha spun around, her eyes blazing with a fire that took his breath away. That wasn't your choice to make. You didn't get to decide what life I deserved. You didn't get to decide that I wasn't worth fighting for. I thought I was protecting you. From what? Love? Partnership? A future together? She laughed, but there was no humor in it, only pain. Do you have any idea what it was like? Waking up to find you gone, finding out from your landlord that you'd broken your lease, calling your office only to discover you'd moved to Silicon Valley without even... Her voice cracked, and Alan shot to his feet, instinctively moving toward her. Natasha, please, let me explain. No. She held up a hand, stopping him in his tracks. I don't want your explanations. I don't want your excuses. I want you to understand that your choice, your grand gesture of protection, cost me everything. Everything. For a moment he thought she might tell him about the pregnancy, about the decision she'd made to raise their daughter alone. But instead she turned back to the window, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. I loved you, she whispered so quietly he had to strain to hear. I loved you with everything I had, and you made that love feel worthless. Do you know how long it took me to put myself back together? To trust that I was worth more than being abandoned when things got complicated? Alan felt like he was drowning, each word she spoke pulling him deeper into the ocean of his mistakes. I never meant... It doesn't matter what you meant. She wiped her eyes quickly, professionally, as if tears were just another symptom to be managed. What matters is what you did, and what you did was choose your ambition over us. A soft knock on the door interrupted them, followed by Rahama's cheerful voice. Mama, can I come in? I want to show you my robot. Natasha immediately transformed, her maternal instincts smoothing away the raw emotion as she opened the door. Of course, sweetheart. Come in. Rahama bounced into the room, clutching a coloring book page featuring an elaborate robot design filled in with meticulous care. But her attention quickly shifted to Alan, who was standing awkwardly by the examination table, looking like a man who'd just been hit by a truck. Are you feeling better now? She asked him with the innocent directness that only children possessed. Mama's really good at fixing hearts. She fixed Mrs. Johnson's heart last month, and now Mrs. Johnson can dance again. Alan's eyes met Natasha's over their daughter's head, and he saw the same thought reflected there. If only hearts could be fixed so easily. I'm feeling much better, Alan managed, crouching down to Rahama's eye level. That's a beautiful robot. Did you design it yourself? Rahama beamed, her whole face lighting up with pride. Uh-huh. It's a helper robot. See, it has special arms for hugging people who are sad and sensors for detecting when someone needs ice cream. Despite everything, Alan found himself smiling, a real smile, the first genuine one he'd worn in years. Ice cream sensors? That's brilliant. Every robot should have those. That's what I said. Rahama clapped her hands together. Mama says I'm going to be an engineer someday, like the people who build rockets and bridges and... She paused, studying his face with unsettling intensity. You have really pretty eyes. They're the same color as the sea glass Mama and I found at the beach last summer. Alan's breath caught. Sea glass. Natasha had always loved collecting sea glass, spent hours combing beaches for those perfect, smooth pieces worn soft by salt and time. The fact that she still did it, that she shared that with their daughter, made his chest ache with longing. "Thank you," he said softly. "That's a very nice compliment. Rahama, sweetheart, why don't you go pack up your coloring supplies?" Natasha's voice was carefully controlled, but Alan could hear the strain beneath it. "We need to head home soon." "Okay, Mama." Rahama skipped toward the door, then turned back to Alan. "Will you be coming back to see Mama again?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Alan looked at Natasha, searching her face for any sign of what she wanted him to say. "Yes," he said finally, never taking his eyes off Natasha. "I'll be coming back." After Rahama left, the silence returned, heavier now with the weight of their daughter's innocent presence. "She's incredible," Alan said quietly. "She's brilliant and funny and—" "She's mine." The words came out fierce, protective. "I've raised her by myself for 6 years. I've been her everything. Mother, father, teacher, protector. She doesn't need disruption in her life. She doesn't need her father." Natasha's jaw tightened. "She needs stability. She needs routine. She needs to know that the people in her life won't disappear when things get tough." The accusation stung because it was true. Alan had disappeared when things got tough. He'd chosen the easier path, the one that didn't require him to figure out how to balance love and ambition, commitment and career. "I'm not the same man I was 7 years ago," he said. "Aren't you?" She gathered up his chart and test forms, her movements brisk and efficient. "You're still the man who built an empire by putting work above everything else. You're still the man who measures success in dollars and market share. What's different, Alan?" "Really?" He wanted to tell her everything, how empty his success felt without someone to share it with, how he'd built his fortune on the foundation of losing her, how every achievement felt hollow because she wasn't there to celebrate with him. But the words stuck in his throat, tangled with years of regret and self-doubt. "I don't sleep," he said instead, the admission pulled from some deep, vulnerable place. "I haven't slept well in 7 years. Every night I lie in my king-sized bed in my empty penthouse and remember what it felt like to fall asleep with you in my arms. I've made more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, but I'd give it all up for one more night of that." Natasha's professional mask slipped for just a moment, and he saw the woman beneath, the one who'd loved him, who'd planned a future with him, who'd been broken by his leaving. "It's too late for poetry, Alan," she said, but her voice was softer now, tinged with something that might have been grief. "Some things can't be fixed with pretty words and romantic gestures. What about with time? With proof that I've changed?" She looked at him for a long moment, and he saw her internal struggle played out across her features, the war between the woman who'd loved him and the mother who would protect her child at any cost. "Your appointment confirmations are at the front desk," she said finally, deflecting his question. "Don't miss them. Consistency is important for accurate results." It wasn't an answer, but it wasn't a no either. Alan took it as the small victory it was. "Thank you," he said, meaning more than just the medical care. "For everything. For taking care of yourself, for becoming the incredible woman you always were meant to be, for raising our—" He caught himself. "For raising Rahama to be so amazing." Natasha's breath hitched almost imperceptibly at his near slip, but she didn't correct him. "She is amazing," she agreed quietly. "She's the best thing I've ever done." "She should have been ours," Alan thought, but didn't say. Instead, he nodded and headed for the door. "Alan?" He turned back, hope flaring in his chest. "Don't hurt her. Whatever you're thinking, whatever you're planning, she's been through enough. We both have. I would never hurt her," he said with fierce conviction. Or you. Not again. As he walked out of the examination room, Alan carried with him the sound of Rahama's laughter, the memory of Natasha's tears, and the crushing weight of 7 years' worth of what might have been. Chapter 3. Memories resurface. 7 years earlier. The coffee shop on Fifth Street had terrible acoustics, mismatched furniture, and the kind of charm that only came from years of students spilling their hearts and caffeine across scratched wooden tables. Alan had discovered it by accident, ducking in from a sudden downpour, and stayed because the girl with the medical textbooks had looked up when he'd cursed his soaked laptop. Rice, she'd said simply, not looking up from her anatomy diagrams. Put it in rice overnight. Might save it. Her voice had been like warm honey with just a hint of amusement that made him want to hear it again. When she finally looked up, Alan felt the world tilt sideways. She was beautiful in a way that made his chest tight. Natural hair framing a face that belonged in art galleries, eyes that sparkled with intelligence and mischief, skin that seemed to glow from within. Does that actually work? He'd asked, clutching his laptop like a lifeline to keep talking to her. Depends on how badly you treated it, she'd replied, and something in her tone suggested she wasn't just talking about electronics. That had been the beginning. 3 hours of conversation that felt like 3 minutes, coffee growing cold as they talked about everything and nothing. Her dreams of becoming a cardiologist, his crazy idea for a tech startup, the books they'd read, the places they wanted to travel, the future that suddenly seemed bright enough to blind them both. I'm Natasha, she'd said when the coffee shop started closing around them. Alan, he'd replied, already knowing he was falling. Present day. Alan sat in his Tesla outside Riverside Medical Center, the memory so vivid he could still smell the coffee shop's cinnamon-scented air. His hands gripped the steering wheel as wave after wave of recollection crashed over him, each one more painful than the last. Their first official date had been at the Natural History Museum, Natasha's choice, because she'd wanted to see the human heart exhibit. They'd stood in front of the preserved organ, her hand warm in his, as she'd explained how the chambers worked, how every beat was a miracle of engineering. The heart is the only muscle that never gets to rest, she'd said, her voice full of wonder. It starts beating before we're even born, and it doesn't stop until we die. Imagine the endurance, the commitment to keep going no matter what. Alan had squeezed her hand, thinking that his heart had found its rhythm the moment he'd met her. Their relationship had unfolded like a flower blooming in fast forward. Late-night study sessions where she'd quiz him on business theory while he helped her memorize medical terminology. Lazy Sunday mornings tangled in his sheets, planning a future that seemed as certain as sunrise. The way she'd curl against his chest, tracing patterns on his skin while telling him about her day, her dreams, her fears. I want to fix hearts, she'd whispered one night, her breath warm against his neck. Literally and figuratively. I want to give people more time with the ones they love. You already fixed mine, he'd whispered back, meaning every word. They'd moved in together after 8 months, a tiny apartment near campus that felt like paradise because it was theirs. Natasha had insisted on cooking Sunday dinners, claiming it kept her grounded despite her demanding pre-med schedule. Alan would work on his laptop at the kitchen table, stealing glances at her as she hummed while chopping vegetables, her movements graceful and efficient. What are you staring at? She'd catch him sometimes, laughing when he'd blush like a teenager. My future, he'd always answer, and she'd kiss him until his laptop was forgotten and dinner burned on the stove. Present day. Alan's phone buzzed with a text from his assistant about the Tokyo deal, snapping him back to reality. But instead of opening it, he found himself scrolling through his contacts until he found the folder he'd never deleted, the one labeled N that contained every photo, every voicemail, every text message from their 2 years together. There she was, laughing at his terrible attempt at making pancakes, flour in her hair and joy in her eyes. There they were at the beach, Natasha holding up a piece of sea glass like a treasure, the sunset turning her skin golden. There was the selfie she'd taken of them on Christmas morning, both of them ridiculous in matching pajamas she'd insisted on buying. His finger hovered over a video, one he'd never been able to watch but could never delete. The timestamp showed it was from 2 weeks before he'd left. With trembling hands, he pressed play. Natasha's face filled the screen, radiant with happiness. She was in their kitchen wearing one of his old college t-shirts, her hair wild from sleep. "Alan Hubler," her recorded voice said, giggling as she spoke to the camera. "You left your phone at home like an absent-minded professor, so I'm leaving you a video message. I have news, baby. Big news. The kind that's going to change everything, but in the most beautiful way possible." Alan's blood turned to ice. He knew what was coming, had pieced it together from the timing, from Rahama's age, from the way Natasha had looked at him in the examination room. But hearing it, seeing the pure joy on her face as she prepared to tell him about their child, "I'm pregnant," she whispered to the camera, her hand moving to her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby, Alan. Our baby. I know it's scary and we're young and you're working so hard on the company, but—" Her voice broke with happiness. "I'm so happy. I can't wait to tell you. I can't wait to see your face when—" Alan slammed the phone against the dashboard, the sound echoing through the car like a gunshot. The video kept playing, Natasha's voice now muffled but still audible. "I love you so much. We're going to be a family, just like we always talked about. Come home soon, okay? I have the best surprise waiting for you." 7 years earlier. That same night, Alan had been in a conference room in downtown Seattle, surrounded by investors who smelled like expensive cologne and ruthless ambition. The Meridian Group had offered him everything: unlimited funding, connections, market dominance, but their conditions had been non-negotiable. "Total commitment," Harrison Blackwell, the lead investor, had said, his cold eyes dissecting Alan like a specimen. "No distractions, no divided attention. This company will be your wife, your child, your religion. Can you handle that kind of dedication, Mr. Hubler?" Alan had thought about Natasha waiting at home, probably studying for her MCAT, maybe making that pasta dish he loved. He'd thought about their plans for the weekend, the way she'd been acting lately, secretive, excited about something she claimed was a surprise. "Yes," he'd said, sealing both their fates with a single word. "I can handle it." The contract had required immediate relocation to Silicon Valley. The investors had wanted him isolated, focused, completely devoted to building their vision. And Alan, drunk on ambition and terrified of failure, had agreed to everything. He'd gone home to pack, planning to wake Natasha, to explain, to convince her to come with him. But she'd been sleeping so peacefully, one hand curved protectively over her stomach, in a gesture he hadn't understood at the time. He'd watched her for an hour, memorizing her face in the moonlight, telling himself that this was temporary, that success would give them everything they'd ever dreamed of. He'd left a note. Coward that he was, he'd left a note instead of having the conversation that might have changed everything. "I have to go. There's an opportunity I can't pass up, but it means leaving immediately. I love you, but I need to do this alone. I'll call when I can. Please understand. A. Present day." Alan stared at his reflection in the Tesla's window, seeing the ghost of the young man who'd made the worst decision of his life. He'd been so certain that success would solve everything, that money and power would make him worthy of her love. Instead, it had cost him the only thing that had ever truly mattered. His phone rang, jolting him from his spiral of regret. His assistant's name flashed on the screen, but he ignored it. Nothing the business world could offer him mattered now. Not when he'd finally found what he'd been searching for in every boardroom, every merger, every victory that had felt hollow the moment it was achieved. He'd found his way back to Natasha, back to their daughter. 7 years earlier, 3 weeks after he left, Natasha had called 43 times. Alan knew because he'd counted each missed call, had listened to every voicemail until he had them memorized. The first ones had been confused, worried about why he wasn't answering, then concerned, asking if he was okay, then hurt, pleading for him to just call her back, then angry, demanding explanations. The last voicemail had come on a Tuesday. Her voice had been different, flat, exhausted, empty of everything that had made it uniquely hers. "I get it now," she'd said, each word carefully measured. "You're not coming back. You made your choice, and it wasn't me. That's fine, Alan. I want you to know that I'll be okay. And I want you to know that I hope your opportunity gives you everything you thought you needed. I hope it's worth what you gave up." She'd paused, and Alan had heard her take a shaky breath. "Don't call me back. Don't try to find me. Whatever we had, whatever I thought we were building together, just let it go. Let me go." Present day. Alan closed his eyes, remembering how he'd almost called her back that night, phone in his hand, her number partially dialed. But Harrison Blackwell had walked into his office at that exact moment, reminding him about the Seoul presentation, the Tokyo expansion, the 100 other fires that needed his attention. He told himself there would be time later. That success would give him the words, the worthiness, the life he could offer her. He'd convinced himself that waiting was kindness, that coming back empty-handed would be selfish. 7 years. 7 years of building an empire on the foundation of the greatest loss of his life. 7 years of telling himself that the ache in his chest was just the price of ambition. 7 years of sleeping alone in beds that cost more than most people's cars, surrounded by everything money could buy and nothing that mattered. A knock on his car window made him jump. A parking attendant stood outside, gesturing at the meter that had expired while he'd been lost in the past. "Sorry," Alan said, rolling down the window. "I was just—" "No problem, sir. Happens to all of us sometimes. Lost in thought." Something like that. As he fed quarters into the meter, Alan's mind drifted to Rahama, their daughter, though she didn't know it yet. 6 years old. 6 years of birthdays he'd missed, bedtime stories he'd never read, scraped knees he hadn't kissed better. 6 years of her growing up without knowing her father existed. But she existed. Despite everything he'd done wrong, despite every terrible choice he'd made, something beautiful had come from their love. Natasha had carried their child alone, raised her alone, been everything Rahama needed without his help. The thought filled him with equal parts gratitude and devastation. Gratitude that Natasha was strong enough, loving enough, incredible enough to give their daughter everything she needed. Devastation that he'd missed it all, that his cowardice had cost him the chance to be part of something truly meaningful. Back in his car, Alan made a decision that felt like jumping off a cliff and growing wings at the same time. He wasn't going to let another day pass without fighting for what he'd lost. He wasn't going to let fear or pride or the comfortable numbness of success keep him from the family he'd never stopped loving. He had no idea if Natasha would ever forgive him. No idea if Rahama would want a father who'd been absent from her entire life. No idea if the love that had once burned between them could survive 7 years of silence and regret. But he had to try. For the first time in 7 years, Alan Hubler was going to choose love over everything else, even if it destroyed him, even if it cost him everything he'd built, even if it was too late, especially if it was too late, because some things were worth losing everything for, and Natasha and Rahama were worth everything he had, and more. Chapter 4. The Daughter He Never Knew. The morning of Alan's blood work appointment arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made Seattle look like a postcard. He'd barely slept, his mind spinning between memories of the past and desperate hopes for the future. Every time he'd closed his eyes, he'd seen Rahama's bright smile, heard her innocent questions, felt the earth-shaking recognition that she was his daughter. His daughter. The words still felt surreal, like speaking a foreign language he was just beginning to understand. For 6 years, she'd existed in the world without him knowing, taking her first steps, saying her first words, having her first day of school, all the milestones he dreamed of sharing with Natasha someday. Alan arrived at Riverside Medical Center 40 minutes early for his follow-up EKG appointment, telling himself it was just efficiency, but knowing the truth. He was desperate for another glimpse of the family he'd lost. The test would only take 15 minutes, but maybe, just maybe, he'd catch sight of them again. The medical center's lobby buzzed with morning activity, but Alan's attention fixed immediately on a familiar corner where a small table and chairs had been set up. Rahama sat there now, coloring with the same intense concentration he'd noticed the day before, her small brow furrowed in focus that struck him as oddly familiar. She was alone, which surprised him. A glance around the lobby revealed no sign of Natasha. "Excuse me," he said to the receptionist. "Is Dr. Davis in this morning?" "Oh, yes, she's here early for a cardiac catheterization procedure. Are you here for your EKG, Mr. Hubler?" After finishing his blood work, Alan found himself walking toward the children's corner instead of toward the exit. Rahama looked up as he approached, her face lighting up with recognition. "You're the sad man from yesterday," she announced cheerfully, making Alan wince at the accuracy of her description. "Are you still sad? Did Mama fix your heart yet?" Alan settled into the child-sized chair across from her, his knees nearly hitting his chin. "She's working on it," he said truthfully. "What are you drawing today?" "Yes, but I was wondering, is that her daughter over there by herself?" The receptionist smiled warmly. "Little Rahama?" "She's fine. Dr. Davis often brings her in early on procedure days. Rahama knows the routine. She colors and reads until the day care van picks her up for school. Sweet little thing, isn't she? Smart as a whip, just like her mama." Alan felt his chest tighten. Another routine he'd missed, another piece of their lives he'd known nothing about. While he'd been sleeping in luxury hotels around the world, building his empire, Rahama had been making herself at home in medical center lobbies, adapting to the demands of her mother's career with a maturity that broke his heart. Rahama held up her latest creation, a complex design that looked like architectural blueprints, but with added wings and what appeared to be a propulsion system. "It's a flying house," she explained seriously. "See, sometimes people have to move away for work or stuff. But what if their house could just fly to where they needed to be? Then families wouldn't have to be separated." The innocent wisdom in her words hit Alan like a physical blow. Here was his 6-year-old daughter, unknowingly describing the exact problem that had torn their family apart, offering a child's solution to adult failures. "That's brilliant," he managed, his voice rough with emotion. "Have you shown this to your mom?" "Not yet. She's busy with the heart surgery." Rahama set down her crayon and studied Alan with unsettling directness. "Are you here for another appointment?" "Just some tests," Alan said. "Your mom wants to make sure I'm healthy." "Good. Mama worries when people don't take care of themselves." Rahama tilted her head, and Alan saw so much of himself in the gesture that it took his breath away. "Do you have a family?" The question was like a knife between his ribs. "It's complicated," he said finally. "Complicated how?" 6-year-olds, Alan was learning, didn't accept vague answers. "Well, I had someone I loved very much once, but I made some mistakes and we're not together anymore." Rahama nodded sagely, as if this made perfect sense. "Did you say sorry?" "I'm trying to. Mama says sorry only works if you really mean it, and if you don't do the bad thing again. She picked up another crayon, adding details to her flying house. What did you do that was bad? Alan stared at this precocious child, his child, who was casually delivering life lessons while designing impossible architecture. How could he explain to a 6-year-old that her father had chosen money over love, ambition over family, success over the two people who should have mattered most? I left when I should have stayed, he said simply. I thought other things were more important, but I was wrong. That is bad, Rahama agreed matter-of-factly. Mama says leaving is the worst thing you can do to someone you love, because it makes them think they're not worth staying for. The words, so clearly Natasha's, spoken through their daughter's voice, felt like a verdict delivered by the universe itself. Alan closed his eyes, absorbing the blow, accepting it as deserved. Your mama is very wise, he said when he could speak again. She's the smartest person in the whole world, Rahama said with fierce pride. She can fix any heart, even the really broken ones. She says hearts are tough. They can keep beating even when they're hurt. But they need love to heal properly. What if someone's heart has been broken for a really long time? Alan found himself asking. What if the person who broke it wants to fix it, but they don't know how? Rahama considered this seriously, her little face scrunched in concentration. Mama says healing takes time and proof. You can't just say sorry once and expect everything to be better. You have to show that you really changed, and you have to be patient while the hurt person decides if they want to trust you again. 6 years old, and she understood more about redemption than most adults. Alan felt a surge of pride mixed with profound regret. This incredible little human was half his, carried his DNA, shared his blood, and he'd missed every day of her becoming who she was. You're very smart, he told her, just like your mama. Rahama beamed at the compliment. I want to be a doctor like her someday, or maybe an engineer, or both. Mama says I can be anything I want if I work hard enough. She's right. You can be anything. Alan leaned forward, captivated by her enthusiasm. What kind of engineering interests you? All kinds. I like building things, but I also like how things work inside, like hearts. I know all about hearts because Mama teaches me. Did you know your heart beats about 100,000 times every day? I didn't know that. It's true, and all that blood goes through these tiny little tubes called capillaries. Mama showed me pictures. Rahama's eyes sparkled with the joy of sharing knowledge. She says the heart is the most important muscle because everything else needs what it gives them. Alan thought about his own heart, how it had felt dead for 7 years, functioning but not truly alive, pumping blood through a body that had forgotten how to feel. Until yesterday, until he'd seen Natasha again and remembered what it felt like to be truly, devastatingly alive. Your mom taught you well, he said. She teaches me lots of things, like how to cook Sunday pancakes and how to tie my shoes and how to be brave when things are scary. Rahama's voice grew thoughtful. Sometimes I wonder about my daddy, though. Alan's heart stopped. What do you wonder? Just stuff. Like if he has green eyes like me, or if he likes building things, or if he would read me bedtime stories. She shrugged, trying to appear casual, but Alan could see the carefully hidden longing. Mama says he had to go away before I was born, and sometimes people who go away can't come back. But I still wonder, sometimes. The words destroyed him. This beautiful, brilliant child had spent 6 years wondering about a father who'd been living his empty life just hours away. Close enough to be part of her world, but too selfish, too cowardly, too lost in his own ambition to even know she existed. I bet, Alan said carefully, his voice thick with emotion, I bet he wonders about you too. I bet he thinks about you every day and wishes he could read you bedtime stories and help you build flying houses and tell you how proud he is of how smart and kind and amazing you are." Rahama looked up from her coloring, studying his face with those bright green eyes, his eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul. "Do you really think so?" "I know so," Alan whispered, meaning it with every broken piece of his heart. Before Rahama could respond, a cheerful voice called across the lobby, "Rahama, ready for school." A woman in a daycare center uniform approached with a group of other children in tow. Rahama quickly began packing her art supplies, but paused to look back at Alan. "Will you be here tomorrow?" she asked. Alan glanced toward the cardiology wing where he knew Natasha was working, saving lives, being the incredible woman she'd always been destined to become. "I have another appointment," he said. "So yes, I'll be here." "Good," Rahama said firmly. "I want to show you my robot book. I think you'd like it." As she skipped toward the daycare group, she turned back one more time. "Hey, what's your name? I can't keep calling you the sad man." "Alan," he said, his voice catching on his own name. "My name is Alan." Something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, maybe, or just curiosity. "Alan," she repeated, testing the sound. "That's a nice name. I'm Rahama, but you already knew that." "It's a beautiful name," Alan said. "Perfect for a beautiful, brilliant girl." Rahama grinned and waved goodbye, joining the other children as they headed toward the exit. Alan watched her go, his heart simultaneously soaring and breaking as he absorbed the full impact of what he'd just experienced. 20 minutes. He'd spent 20 minutes with his daughter, and it had changed everything. She was extraordinary, bright and curious and kind, with Natasha's grace and what he hoped might be some of his own stubborn determination. She was everything he'd never dared to dream of when he'd imagined having children someday, and she was growing up without him. Alan remained in the tiny chair long after Rahama had left, staring at the drawing she'd forgotten on the table. The flying house looked back at him, a child's solution to an adult's failures, a symbol of everything he'd lost and everything he still hoped to find. His phone buzzed with messages from his office, his investors, his board of directors. The Tokyo deal was waiting. Contracts needed signing. $1 million decisions required his attention. For the first time in 7 years, Alan ignored them all. Instead, he carefully folded Rahama's drawing and tucked it into his jacket pocket, close to his heart. Then he walked to the reception desk to schedule another appointment with Dr. Davis. Not because he needed medical care, but because he needed another chance to prove that some things were more important than business. Some things were worth fighting for, no matter how long the battle might take. As he left the medical center, Alan carried with him the echo of his daughter's laughter, the memory of her bright curiosity, and the devastating knowledge that love could survive even the worst mistakes, if you were brave enough to fight for it. The flying house in his pocket felt like a promise, a bridge between the man he'd been and the father he still hoped to become. Chapter 5. Coffee Shop Confessions. The same coffee shop on 5th Street hadn't changed much in 7 years. Still mismatched furniture, still terrible acoustics, still the kind of worn charm that made broken hearts feel at home. Alan arrived 30 minutes early, claiming the same corner table where he'd first fallen in love, his hands trembling as he ordered 2 lattes, remembering exactly how Natasha liked hers. Extra foam, cinnamon on top, just enough sweetness to balance the bitter. When she walked through the door at exactly 6:30, Alan's breath caught the same way it had 7 years ago. She'd changed from her medical scrubs into a simple black dress that hugged her curves and made her look like poetry in motion. Her hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, and despite the wariness in her eyes, she was still the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. "You remembered," she said softly, sliding into the chair across from him and staring at the perfectly prepared latte. "I remembered everything," Alan replied, his voice rough with emotion. "Every conversation, every laugh, every dream we shared in this place. I've been carrying it all with me for 7 years." Natasha wrapped her hands around the warm mug, using it as a shield between them. "Then why did you leave?" The question hung in the air like smoke, acrid and suffocating. Alan had rehearsed this conversation 1,000 times in his mind, but now, faced with the reality of her pain, all his carefully planned words crumbled. "Because I was 28 and terrified and convinced that success was the only thing that could make me worthy of you," he said finally. "Because when the Meridian Group offered me everything I thought I wanted, I believed that building an empire was the only way to give you the life you deserved." "The life I deserved." Natasha's voice rose slightly, drawing glances from other patrons. She lowered it to a harsh whisper. "I deserved honesty, Alan. I deserved a conversation. I deserved to be part of the decision that tore our lives apart. You're right. You deserved all of that and more." Alan leaned forward, desperate to close the physical distance, even if the emotional chasm felt insurmountable. "I was a coward. I convinced myself that leaving quietly would be kinder than dragging you through the uncertainty, the long hours, the complete upheaval of everything we'd built together." Natasha laughed, but there was no humor in it, only years of accumulated pain. "Kinder? You think disappearing in the middle of the night with nothing but a note was kind? I know how it sounds. Do you?" She set down her mug with enough force to slosh coffee onto the table. "Do you know what it's like to wake up and find the person you love more than breathing just gone? Do you know what it's like to call and call and call, only to discover that your number has been blocked, that the man who promised to love you forever has erased you from his life like you never existed?" Alan felt each word like a physical blow. "I never blocked your number. I listened to every voicemail, saved every message. Then why didn't you answer?" The question came out as a whisper, broken and raw. "Even once, Alan. Just once, why couldn't you pick up the phone?" "Because I knew that if I heard your voice, really heard it, I would have come home. And I convinced myself that would have been selfish, that it would have ruined both our futures." "Our futures." Natasha's eyes blazed with a fire that took his breath away. "You didn't get to make that choice for both of us. You didn't get to decide what was best for my future. I know that now. God, Natasha, I know that now." Alan reached across the table, his fingertips just brushing hers before she pulled away. "I've spent 7 years regretting every decision I made, every call I didn't answer, every moment I chose my career over... Over what? Over us? Over your daughter?" The words exploded between them like a grenade, and Alan watched Natasha immediately regret saying them. She closed her eyes, her face crumpling with pain. "She's mine," Alan said quietly, not a question but a statement of fact that had been building in his chest since the moment he'd seen Rahma's green eyes. "Yes." The word was barely audible. "She's yours." Alan felt the world tilt, even though he'd known, had pieced it together from timing and resemblance, and the way his heart had recognized her immediately. But hearing it confirmed, seeing the confirmation in Natasha's devastated expression, made it real in a way that stole the breath from his lungs. "The voicemails," he said, understanding flooding through him. "The ones from the last few weeks before I left. You were trying to tell me." Natasha nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I found out 2 days after you signed with Meridian Group. I was so excited, so scared, so happy all at once. I kept calling because I wanted to tell you in person, wanted to see your face when you heard the news. But I was already gone. By the time I realized you weren't coming back, by the time I understood that you'd chosen your company over our relationship, I was 12 weeks pregnant and completely alone." Her voice broke on the last word. Do you have any idea what that felt like? Carrying your child while grieving the loss of the father, knowing that you'd walked away from both of us before you even knew she existed. Alan wanted to reach for her, wanted to gather her in his arms and absorb her pain, but he knew he'd forfeited that right 7 years ago. I'm so sorry, he whispered, the words pathetic and inadequate. I'm so fucking sorry, Natasha. Sorry doesn't give me back the nights I spent crying into my pillow, wondering what I'd done wrong, what I could have said or done differently to make you stay. Her tears came faster now, years of suppressed pain finally breaking free. Sorry doesn't erase the labor I went through alone, or the first steps you missed, or the birthdays when she asked why she didn't have a daddy like the other kids. Each revelation was a knife to his heart, but Alan forced himself to listen, to absorb every detail of the life he'd missed, the pain he'd caused. Tell me about her birth, he said softly. Please. Natasha looked at him for a long moment, and he saw her internal struggle, the desire to hurt him warring with the need to share the most important moment of her life. She was born on a Tuesday in March, she said finally, her voice growing soft with memory. 22 hours of labor, and I did it all alone because I was too proud to call my mother, too heartbroken to reach out to friends who would ask questions about her father. Alan closed his eyes, imagining Natasha going through that alone, being strong when she should have had someone to hold her hand and tell her how brave she was. When they finally put her in my arms, Natasha continued, she looked up at me with these perfect green eyes, your eyes, and I fell apart, because she was so beautiful and I loved her instantly, but I also mourned the fact that you would never see her, never hold her, never know how incredible she was. What did you name her? Rahama. It's beautiful. What does it mean? A ghost of a smile crossed Natasha's face. It means mercy, compassion. I chose it because I hoped that someday, when she was older, she would understand that sometimes people make terrible mistakes, and mercy is the only thing that can heal the wounds left behind. Alan felt the name settle into his heart like a blessing. She's extraordinary. Even from the little time I've spent with her, I can see how brilliant she is, how kind. You've done an incredible job raising her. I've done my best. Natasha wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. But it's been hard, Alan. Harder than you can imagine. Medical school as a single mother, residency with a toddler, building a career while being everything to her. Mother, father, provider, protector. You shouldn't have had to do it alone. No, I shouldn't have, but I did, and we survived. More than survived, we thrived. We built a life together, just the two of us, and it's a good life. She's happy, healthy, loved beyond measure. Alan heard the warning in her words, the protective steel beneath the vulnerability. I'm not trying to disrupt that life, I want to be part of it. I want to know her, to help, if you'll let me, to try to make up for all the years I lost. Make up for it how? Natasha leaned back in her chair, studying him with the clinical detachment she'd perfected as a doctor. With money? With expensive gifts? With grand gestures that make you feel better about abandoning us? Number, I want to make up for it by being present. By being the father she deserves, the partner you should have had all along. Partner? Natasha's laugh was sharp, defensive. Alan, we're not picking up where we left off. We're not some romantic movie where love conquers all and everyone lives happily ever after. You hurt me in ways I'm still recovering from. You have a daughter who doesn't even know you exist. This isn't about us anymore. It's about her. I know. And I know I have no right to ask for anything from you. But Natasha, please, give me a chance to prove that I've changed. Let me show you that I can be the man you both deserve. How? How do I trust you not to leave again when things get complicated? When your business demands more of your time? When the next big opportunity comes along? Alan reached into his jacket and pulled out Rahama's drawing, the flying house that had been burning a hole in his heart since morning. He smoothed it out on the table between them. "She drew this today," he said softly. "A flying house, so families don't have to be separated when people have to move for work. At 6 years old, she solved the problem that I was too blind and selfish to see 7 years ago." Natasha stared at the drawing, her expression softening as she recognized her daughter's handiwork. "I spent 20 minutes with her this morning," Alan continued, "and she taught me more about love and forgiveness and what really matters than 7 years of success ever did. She told me that healing takes time and proof, that you can't just say sorry once and expect everything to be better. She's wise beyond her years. She had to be. Because of my choices, because I forced her to grow up without a father." Alan's voice cracked. "I can't change the past, Natasha. I can't give you back those nights you cried alone, or hold your hand during labor, or see her first steps. But I can be here now. I can choose you both every single day for the rest of my life." Natasha was quiet for a long time, staring at the drawing, at the coffee growing cold between them, at everything except Alan's face. "The Tokyo opportunity," she said finally. Alan blinked, confused. "What?" "I know about the Yamamoto Group's interest in your company. $800 million for full acquisition with international expansion requirements. It was in the Business Journal 2 weeks ago." She finally looked up at him. "Have you made your decision?" The question hit him like ice water. She knew about the potential deal. She knew about the choice that was waiting for him, the same kind of choice that had torn them apart 7 years ago. "I don't," he said simply. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm not taking the deal. I turned it down 3 days ago." Alan pulled out his phone, showing her the email he'd sent to his board of directors. "I've spent 7 years building a company that means nothing without you and Rahama in my life. I'm not making that mistake again." Natasha read the email, her eyes widening as she absorbed the magnitude of what he was saying. "You turned down $800 million. I turned down everything that would take me away from the 2 most important people in my world." For the first time since they'd sat down, Natasha looked at him without defensive armor, without the careful distance she'd maintained. He saw surprise there and something that might have been hope. "Alan, I love you," he said, the words tumbling out like water through a broken dam. "I never stopped loving you, not for a single day, not for a single moment. I love the woman you were, the woman you've become, the mother you are to our daughter. I love you enough to walk away if that's what's best for both of you, but I love you too much not to fight for the chance to be the man you deserve." Natasha's tears started again, but these were different, softer, confused, carrying 7 years of carefully guarded hope. "I don't know if I can do this again," she whispered. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to trust you with my heart." "With her heart." "Then don't," Alan said, reaching across the table to gently touch her hand. This time she didn't pull away. "Don't trust me yet. Make me earn it. Let me prove, day by day, moment by moment, that I've learned what really matters. Let me show you both that love isn't something you choose once. It's something you choose every day, in every decision, for the rest of your life." Natasha stared at their joined hands, and Alan felt the electric connection that had never really died, just been buried under years of hurt and regret. "She asks about you sometimes," she said so quietly he had to lean forward to hear. "About her father. I never knew what to tell her. Tell her the truth, that her father made terrible mistakes but never stopped loving her mother, that he's been lost for a long time but wants to find his way home. And if she wants to meet you, really meet you, not just random encounters at the medical center." Alan's heart soared even as he tried to keep his expression calm. "Then I would consider that the greatest gift I could ever receive." Natasha pulled her hand away, but gently, and Alan took that as progress. "This won't be easy," she warned. "I won't just let you walk back into our lives like nothing happened. If you want to be part of this, really part of this, you'll have to prove yourself. To me, and more importantly, to her. I understand. And I won't lie to her or make up fairy tales about why you weren't there before. She's old enough to understand that sometimes adults make bad choices, and she deserves honesty." "She deserves everything," Alan agreed, "including the truth." Natasha nodded slowly, and Alan saw her making the decision that would change all their lives. "Saturday afternoon. There's a science museum exhibit on robotics that she's been dying to see. If you want to meet your daughter, really meet her, be there at 2 o'clock. Alan felt tears prick his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for giving me this chance." "Don't thank me yet," Natasha said, standing to leave. "Thank me when you prove that this time you're choosing love over everything else." As she walked away, Alan sat alone at their table, staring at Rahama's drawing of the flying house. In 3 days, he would meet his daughter properly. In 3 days, he would begin the hardest and most important job of his life, earning the right to be called her father. The coffee shop around him buzzed with life and conversation, but Alan heard only the promise in Natasha's words and the second chance echoing in his heart like a prayer finally answered. Chapter 6. Building Bridges. Saturday arrived with the weight of destiny wrapped in autumn sunshine. Alan stood outside the Seattle Science Museum at 1:45 p.m., his palms sweating despite the cool October air. He'd changed clothes 3 times that morning, finally settling on dark jeans and a simple navy sweater. In his hands, he carried a carefully chosen gift, a build-your-own robot kit that he'd researched for hours online. When Natasha appeared at the museum entrance with Rahama skipping beside her, Alan's breath caught. His daughter wore a bright yellow dress with tiny gears printed on it and sneakers that lit up with each step. She looked like pure joy in motion, and Alan felt his chest tighten with overwhelming love. "There's the sad man," Rahama called out, waving enthusiastically. "But you don't look sad today. You look happy." "I am happy," Alan said, crouching down to her level. "I'm happy because I get to spend the day with 2 of my favorite people." Rahama giggled at being called one of his favorites, while Natasha gave him a cautious nod of acknowledgement. She looked beautiful in jeans and a soft green sweater that brought out her eyes. "Mama said you used to know each other a long time ago," Rahama said, studying Alan with that direct gaze that seemed to see straight through to his soul. "We did," Alan confirmed, glancing at Natasha. "Your mama and I were very good friends. Were you in love?" The question came with innocent bluntness, and Alan saw Natasha's cheeks flush pink. "Rahama," Natasha said gently, "remember what we talked about. Some questions are very personal." "But I want to know," Rahama protested, then looked back at Alan. "Were you? Because you look at Mama the same way Prince Eric looks at Ariel in my movie." Alan couldn't help but smile. "Your Mama is very special," he said carefully. "She always has been." Satisfied with this answer, Rahama grabbed Alan's free hand with startling casualness. "Come on. I want to see the robots that can think for themselves." The simple contact, her small hand in his large one, nearly overwhelmed Alan. This was his daughter, trusting him enough to lead him forward. Her hand was warm and soft, with a slight stickiness that spoke of hastily consumed fruit snacks. Inside the museum, Rahama's excitement was infectious. She dragged Alan from exhibit to exhibit, explaining the mechanics with an understanding that impressed him. Natasha followed a few steps behind, watchful but allowing them to bond. "Look at this one," Rahama said, pointing to a robotic arm that could paint pictures. "It's making art all by itself." Mama explained that it uses special math to decide what colors to use. Isn't that cool? It's incredible, Alan agreed, genuinely amazed by his daughter's enthusiasm. How do you know so much about how robots work? Mama teaches me. She says understanding how things work inside helps you fix them when they break. Like hearts. Hearts are like machines that pump blood everywhere in your body. Alan looked at Natasha over Rahama's head, seeing the pride and love shining in her eyes as she watched their daughter share her knowledge. Your mama is an excellent teacher. The best teacher ever, Rahama agreed. She explains things so I can understand them, and she never makes me feel dumb for asking questions. They spent the next hour moving through the exhibits, and Alan found himself marveling at the way Rahama's mind worked. She asked thoughtful questions, made connections between concepts, and approached each display with fearless curiosity. I brought you something, Alan said when they reached a quieter section of the museum. He held out the robot kit, his heart hammering as he waited for her reaction. Rahama's eyes went wide as she examined the box. This is the Junior Builder bot. I've been wanting this forever, but Mama said it was too expensive for right now. She looked up at him with shining eyes. This is for me? Really? Really? I thought maybe we could build it together sometime. Today? Can we build it today? Alan looked at Natasha, seeking permission. She nodded slowly, and he felt a surge of gratitude. They found a quiet cafe area and spread the robot components across a table. Alan had expected to lead the project, but quickly discovered that Rahama had definite ideas about construction methodology. No, that piece goes there, she corrected him patiently, her small fingers deftly handling the larger components. See how the picture shows the connection. If you put it backwards, the arms won't move right. You're absolutely right, Alan said, marveling at her technical vocabulary. I stand corrected. Mama says everyone makes mistakes, even grown-ups. The important thing is being willing to learn from them. Rahama glanced up at him with those green eyes that mirrored his own. Do you like learning new things? I do, especially when I have such a good teacher. They worked side by side for the next 2 hours, and Alan found himself falling completely in love with his daughter's personality. She was patient when he struggled, encouraging when he got frustrated, and brilliant in her problem-solving approach. When they encountered a programming challenge, she suggested asking Natasha for help. Mama knows about electrical systems because of hearts, Rahama explained. Maybe she can help us figure out why our robot's arm keeps jerking. Natasha joined them at the table, and suddenly Alan was acutely aware of her proximity as she leaned over the robot. When she accidentally brushed against his shoulder while reaching for a component, he felt electricity shoot through his entire body. I think the issue is in the calibration, she said, her professional focus kicking in. See how this sensor is reading incorrectly? You need to reset the baseline measurements. Working together, the three of them debugged the programming, and when the little robot finally performed its first successful movements, Rahama cheered with delight. We did it. We actually did it. She hugged the robot, then impulsively hugged Alan. Thank you for helping me build him. This is the best day ever. Alan's arms closed around his daughter, and for a moment, the world disappeared. When Rahama pulled back, he had to blink away tears. What should we name him? Alan asked, his voice slightly rough. Rahama considered seriously. How about Bridge? Because he's like a bridge between old technology and new technology, and also because... She paused, looking between Alan and Natasha with sudden shyness. Because he helped us all work together today. Alan met Natasha's eyes across the table and saw his own emotion reflected there. Their daughter had unknowingly named their creation after exactly what they were all trying to build. Bridge is perfect, Natasha said softly. As they prepared to leave the museum, Rahama chattered excitedly about modifications she wanted to make to Bridge. Can Alan come over for dinner tomorrow? Rahama asked suddenly as they stood outside. I want to show him my room and my other projects, and Mama makes the best Sunday pancakes in the whole world. Alan's heart stopped. He looked at Natasha, trying not to appear too hopeful. I think that could be arranged, Natasha said carefully. If Alan doesn't have other plans. No other plans, Alan said quickly. No plans at all. Yay, Rahama bounced on her toes. Can you come early? Like 10 o'clock. That's when we usually start cooking. I'll be there at 10, Alan promised. As they prepared to part ways, Rahama hugged Alan goodbye with the easy affection of a child who had decided he was worth trusting. Thank you for today, she said into his chest. I had so much fun building bridge with you and Mama. When Rahama skipped ahead, Natasha stepped closer to Alan. For a moment, they stood in the golden afternoon light, the ghosts of their past mingling with the tentative hope of their future. She likes you, Natasha said quietly. I love her, Alan replied without hesitation. She's extraordinary, Natasha. You've raised an incredible human being. She's the best of both of us, Natasha said, and something in her tone made Alan's heart skip. I see you in her curiosity, her determination to understand how things work. And I see you in her kindness, her wisdom, her ability to make everyone around her feel special and valued. Alan paused, gathering courage. I see you in the way she loves completely. They looked at each other for a long moment, years of history and hurt and hope passing between them in silence. Tomorrow, Natasha said finally, she's going to ask more questions. About us, about why you weren't there before, about what happens next. Are you prepared for that? I'm prepared to be honest, Alan said. She deserves the truth. She does. Natasha adjusted her purse strap, a nervous gesture Alan remembered. And so do I. If you're going to be part of her life, I need to know this isn't just guilt or novelty. I need to know you're committed to being present, even when it's difficult. I'm committed, Alan said firmly, to her and to earning your trust again. I know I have a long way to go, but today felt like a beginning. It did, Natasha agreed softly. A very small beginning. As she walked away with Rahama, Alan remained standing outside the museum, watching until they disappeared around the corner. In his pocket, Bridges' programming cord had gotten tangled with Rahama's original flying house drawing, and he smiled at the symbolism. For the first time in 7 years, Alan went to sleep that night with anticipation instead of regret filling his chest. Tomorrow he would sit at Natasha's kitchen table, learn their Sunday morning traditions, and take another small step toward becoming the father Rahama deserved, and the man Natasha might someday trust again. Chapter 7. Dangerous Territory. Sunday morning arrived with the soft patter of Seattle rain against windows, and the kind of cozy atmosphere that made staying inside feel like a gift. Alan stood on Natasha's doorstep at exactly 10 o'clock, holding a bag of premium coffee beans and a bouquet of sunflowers. Rahama's favorite, according to his careful mental catalog of everything he'd learned about his daughter. When the door opened, he was greeted by the sight of Natasha in pajama pants and an oversized sweater, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, and no makeup. She was breathtakingly beautiful in her casual authenticity, more radiant than any of the polished socialites who had graced his arm at corporate events. You're punctual, she said, stepping aside to let him in. Rahama's been up since 7, organizing her projects to show you. Alan stepped into their home for the first time and immediately felt the warmth that money couldn't buy. The small apartment was filled with evidence of their life together. Rahama's artwork covering the refrigerator, a cozy reading nook with well-loved books, family photos showing just the two of them, but radiating happiness. The space was modest but rich with love and all the things that made a house a home. Alan. Rahama appeared in the hallway wearing matching pajamas and bunny slippers, her face bright with excitement. "You came. I was worried maybe you changed your mind." The innocent comment hit Alan like a punch to the chest. Of course, she would worry about people changing their minds. She'd spent 6 years with a father who had never shown up. "I would never change my mind about spending time with you," Alan said, kneeling down to her level. "When I make a promise to someone I care about, I keep it." Rahama beamed and grabbed his hand. "Come see my room first, then we can cook." Her bedroom was a perfect reflection of her personality. Constellation charts on one wall, blueprints she'd drawn for inventions on another, and a corner dedicated to half-built projects. Alan spent 20 minutes listening to detailed explanations of each creation, marveling at the complexity of her imagination. "This is my perpetual motion machine," she said proudly, showing him a contraption made of cardboard tubes and marbles. "It doesn't actually work perpetually because of friction, but it's still pretty cool." "Did you learn about friction in school?" Alan asked, amazed. "Mama taught me. She says understanding energy helps explain how blood moves through the body." Rahama shrugged as if this were perfectly normal. "Want to see my volcano?" By the time they made it to the kitchen, Alan was completely smitten with his daughter's brilliant mind and infectious enthusiasm. Natasha was already there, having laid out ingredients for their famous pancakes, and Alan noticed she'd changed into jeans and a soft blue sweater. "Okay, student," Rahama announced seriously, pulling up a step stool to the counter. "First lesson in Davis family pancakes. We make everything from scratch, because store-bought mix is for amateurs." "Noted," Alan said solemnly, accepting the apron Natasha handed him with barely concealed amusement. What followed was the most chaotic and wonderful cooking experience of Alan's life. Rahama was a demanding teacher, critiquing his measuring technique and insisting he remix the batter when it wasn't fluffy enough. Natasha moved around the kitchen with practiced ease, occasionally correcting their technique, but mostly watching with fond amusement as father and daughter bonded over pancake methodology. "No, no, you're stirring too much." Rahama giggled as Alan enthusiastically mixed the batter. "Mama, he's making the pancakes tough." "Alan," Natasha said with mock seriousness, "didn't you pay attention during the stirring lecture?" "I was distracted by my excellent teacher," Alan replied, catching Natasha's eye and seeing something soft flicker there before she looked away. When Alan inevitably splattered batter across his shirt, Rahama dissolved into giggles. "You're messier than I am, and I'm 6. "That's a serious accusation," Alan said, dramatically wiping batter from his cheek. "I'll have you know I'm usually very coordinated." "Sure you are," Natasha teased, handing him a dish towel. "Is this the same coordination that built a tech empire?" The morning flew by in a blur of laughter, flour explosions, and perfectly imperfect pancakes. When they finally sat down to eat, Rahama had claimed the seat between Alan and Natasha, chattering about her plans for Bridges' next upgrade while systematically drowning her pancakes in syrup. "These are incredible," Alan said, taking his first bite. "I can see why they're famous in the Davis household." "Secret ingredient," Rahama whispered conspiratorially. "Love. Mama says food tastes better when you make it with people you care about." Alan's eyes met Natasha's across the table, and he saw her breath catch slightly at their daughter's innocent observation. The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken possibility. After breakfast, the rain had intensified, turning their planned walk into an indoor day. Rahama suggested they build a fort in the living room, an idea that Alan embraced with the enthusiasm of a man who'd forgotten what it felt like to play. "Engineering principles apply to fort construction too," Rahama explained as they dragged couch cushions and blankets into position. "You need structural integrity, proper weight distribution, and strategic anchor points." "She's not wrong," Natasha said, helping Alan secure a blanket to the back of the couch. She redesigned our Christmas tree setup last year using load-bearing calculations. Working together, they constructed an elaborate fort that took up half the living room, complete with multiple chambers and a skylight made from a strategic gap between cushions. When they crawled inside to test their creation, Alan found himself in close proximity to both Natasha and Rahama, their bodies warm against his in the cozy enclosed space. "This is perfect," Rahama declared, settling between them with a book about space exploration. "Will you read to me?" "Mama does different voices for all the characters." Alan took the book, hyper-aware of Natasha beside him in the dim, intimate space of their fort. As he began reading about distant galaxies and brave astronauts, Rahama curled against his side with the trust of a child who had decided he belonged there. Natasha leaned back against the cushions, her shoulder brushing his, and Alan felt the rightness of this moment settle into his bones. Somewhere between chapters 3 and 4, Rahama fell asleep, her head heavy against Alan's chest, her breathing deep and even. Alan continued reading softly, not wanting to disturb her, but gradually becoming aware that Natasha had shifted closer, drawn by the intimate cocoon of their blanket fort. "She hasn't fallen asleep like that with anyone else," Natasha whispered when Alan finished the chapter. "She's usually too excited around new people to relax." "She doesn't see me as new people," Alan realized, looking down at his sleeping daughter. "Somehow she knows." "Children are intuitive about these things," Natasha said softly. "She's been asking more questions about her father lately. Part of me thinks she recognized something in you from the very beginning." In the warm dimness of their fort, with rain pattering against the windows and their daughter sleeping peacefully between them, Alan felt the walls they'd both built around their hearts beginning to crack. He turned to face Natasha, seeing her in the filtered light that made her appear almost ethereal. "Thank you," he whispered, "for this morning, for letting me be part of your Sunday tradition, for giving me the chance to know her." "She's happy," Natasha replied, her voice barely audible. "I haven't seen her this happy in a long time." "What about you?" The question slipped out before Alan could stop it. "Are you happy?" Natasha was quiet for so long that Alan thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her words were carefully measured. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "Terrified that I'm starting to remember what it felt like to have you in my life. Terrified that she's getting attached to you. Terrified that you'll leave again, and I'll have to pick up the pieces of both our hearts." Alan shifted carefully, not wanting to wake Rahama, but needing to close the distance between them. "I won't leave." "You don't know that. When your company demands more time, when opportunities arise, when the reality of daily parenting stops being novel and starts being work." "I know that I love her more than I thought it was possible to love another human being," Alan interrupted softly. "I know that watching her explain friction makes me prouder than any business deal I've ever closed. I know that seeing her trust me with her heart is worth more than every dollar I've ever made." "And me?" Natasha's question was barely a whisper. "What about me?" Alan reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently touched her face. She didn't retreat, and he felt his heart hammering against his ribs. "I know that I've been in love with you for 7 years, even when I was too stupid and scared to admit it. I know that you're the only woman who has ever made me want to be better than I am. I know that watching you with our daughter, seeing the incredible mother you've become, makes me fall in love with you all over again." Natasha's breath hitched, and Alan saw tears gathering in her eyes. "Alan, I know that you have every reason not to trust me, and I know that I have to earn the right to be part of this family. But I also know that I want to spend the rest of my life proving to both of you that love is a choice I make every single day." They were inches apart now, their daughter sleeping peacefully between them, the world outside their blanket fort forgotten. Alan could see the war playing out in Natasha's eyes, the desire to trust him fighting against the fear of being hurt again. "This is dangerous," she whispered. "Why?" "Because I'm starting to believe you. Because when you look at me like that, I remember what it felt like to be loved by you. Because I want to kiss you so badly right now that I can barely breathe." Alan's heart stopped. "Natasha." "But I can't. We can't. Not yet. Not when she could wake up and see us. Not when I don't know if I can trust what's happening between us." Alan nodded, understanding even as every cell in his body screamed in protest. "I'll wait," he said. "However long it takes, I'll wait." They stayed that way for another hour, so close they shared the same air, watching their daughter sleep and feeling the dangerous pull of everything they'd once been and everything they might become again. When Rama finally stirred, yawning and blinking sleepily, she smiled at finding herself surrounded by both her parents in their cozy hideaway. "Best fort ever," she mumbled, snuggling closer to Alan. "Can we keep it up forever?" Alan met Natasha's eyes over their daughter's head, seeing his own longing reflected there. "For as long as you want," he promised, and hoped desperately that forever might actually be possible. As the afternoon wound down and Alan reluctantly prepared to leave, Rahama extracted promises for more visits, more cooking lessons, more robot building sessions. But it was the moment when Natasha walked him to the door that would haunt Alan's dreams. "Today was—" she started, then stopped, shaking her head. "I don't know what today was." "It was a beginning," Alan said softly. "At least, I hope it was." "It was dangerous," she repeated, but there was less conviction in her voice this time. The best things usually are. As Alan drove home through the rain, he carried with him the memory of Natasha's soft breathing in their blanket fort, the weight of his daughter sleeping against his chest, and the tantalizing possibility that love might indeed be strong enough to bridge even the widest chasm of hurt and regret. Chapter 8. The Push and Pull. The week following their blanket, Fort Sunday passed in a carefully orchestrated dance of approach and retreat. Alan respected Natasha's need for space, but his presence became a steady constant in their lives. School pickup when her surgery ran late, quick coffee deliveries to the hospital during her grueling shifts, engineering consultations for Rahama's increasingly ambitious projects. Each interaction was polite, careful, charged with the memory of almost kisses and whispered confessions. Alan could see Natasha's internal struggle in the way she lingered just a moment too long when their fingers brushed passing coffee cups, in the soft smile that crossed her face when she watched him help Rahama with homework, in the quick way she looked away whenever their eyes met, for more than a fleeting second. It was Thursday evening when everything shifted. Alan had just finished reading Rahama a bedtime story, a tradition that had somehow evolved naturally over the past week, when his phone rang with an emergency. A critical system failure at his company's main server facility, the kind of crisis that demanded immediate attention and could cost millions if not handled properly. "I have to go," he said, genuinely torn as he looked at Rahama's disappointed face. "There's an emergency at work that I need to handle, but you promised we'd work on Bridge's voice recognition module tonight," Rahama said, her lower lip jutting out in a pout that reminded Alan painfully of himself at that age. "I know, sweetheart, and I'm sorry. Can we do it tomorrow instead?" "You always say that," Rahama muttered, then caught herself. "I mean, okay." Alan felt like he'd been punched in the gut. The casual way she'd said, "You always say that," as if broken promises were just another fact of life, made him realize that despite all his good intentions, he was still failing her in small ways. "Rahama, look at me." He knelt down to her eye level, taking her small hands in his. "I promise you, on my word as someone who cares about you very much, that we will work on bridge tomorrow night. Nothing will stop me from being here, okay? She studied his face with those serious green eyes. Even if work needs you, even if work needs me, you're more important than work. You will always be more important than work. Rahama nodded solemnly, and Alan kissed her forehead before reluctantly heading to handle his corporate crisis. 3 hours later, he was deep in a server room, coordinating with his team to restore critical systems when Natasha's number flashed on his phone. His heart stopped. She never called him directly. Alan, her voice was strained, panicked. I'm at the hospital. There was an accident, a multi-car collision, and I'm going to be here all night. Rahama is at home with Mrs. Patterson from next door, but she's 90 and she can barely stay awake past 9 o'clock. I don't know what to do. I'm on my way, Alan said, already signaling to his team that he needed to leave. But your emergency is handled. I'm 15 minutes out. He left his CTO to manage the remaining issues and drove through the Seattle night with his heart in his throat, remembering his promise to Rahama about priorities. This was his chance to prove that he meant what he'd said about her being more important than work. Mrs. Patterson answered the door, looking relieved and exhausted. Oh, thank goodness. That little angel has been worried sick about her mama. She's trying to be brave, but I can tell she's scared. Alan found Rahama in her room, sitting on her bed in pajamas, clutching a stuffed elephant and staring out the window toward the hospital lights in the distance. Hey, sweetheart, he said softly, settling beside her on the bed. I'm here. Mama's working on the hurt people, Rahama said in a small voice. Sometimes she has to work all night when people are really, really hurt. She's helping them get better. That's what she does. She fixes hearts and saves lives. I know. Rahama leaned against his side, and Alan felt the trust in that simple gesture. I'm glad you came. Mrs. Patterson is nice, but she doesn't know about checking under the bed for monsters or how I like my water cup filled exactly halfway. Alan's chest tightened. Well, I'm a very thorough monster checker, and I'm excellent at precise water measurements. That earned him a small giggle, and over the next hour, Alan discovered the intricate bedtime routine that Natasha had perfected over 6 years of single parenting. The specific way Rahama's blankets needed to be tucked, the nightlight positioned just so, the quiet conversation about the day's highlights and tomorrow's plans. Alan. Rahama's voice was sleepy as he prepared to leave her room. Yes, sweetheart. Are you going to stay here tonight in case Mama needs us? The question hit him with unexpected force. In case Mama needs us. As if they were a unit, a family, a team that faced things together. If you want me to, yes, I can sleep on the couch and be here when you wake up. I want you to, she said decisively. And I think Mama would want you to too, even if she's too scared to say it. Out of the mouths of babes. Alan made himself at home in Natasha's living space, surrounded by the evidence of their life together. He found himself studying family photos on the mantel. Rahama as a baby, first steps, birthday parties, school plays, beach trips. 7 years of memories he'd missed, 7 years of Natasha being everything to their daughter. His phone buzzed with updates from his office throughout the night, but Alan ignored them all. For the first time in his adult life, work could wait. His family needed him here. He dozed fitfully on the couch, waking at every small sound in case Rahama needed him. At 6 a.m., he was making coffee when he heard the front door open quietly. Natasha appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in her scrubs, exhaustion written in every line of her body. Her hair was pulled back messily, she had shadows under her eyes, and she looked absolutely beautiful in the soft morning light. You stayed, she said quietly, surprised. Rahama asked me to. She was worried about you. And you just left your emergency, your server crisis. Alan studied her face, seeing the disbelief there, the careful wall she kept constructed around her heart. My team handled it. They're perfectly capable without me micromanaging every detail. But it was important, not as important as being here when you both needed me. He poured her a cup of coffee, remembering exactly how she liked it. How are the patients? Natasha accepted the coffee with hands that trembled slightly from exhaustion and emotion. They'll be okay. 3 surgeries, but everyone's stable now. She took a sip and closed her eyes gratefully. I kept thinking about her here, worried about me and feeling terrible that I couldn't be in both places at once. You don't have to be in both places at once anymore, Alan said gently. Not if you don't want to be. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and Alan saw the moment her carefully maintained composure began to crack. I've been doing this alone for so long, she whispered. Being everything to her, handling every crisis, making every decision. Sometimes I forget that it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be that way. But what if I let you in and you leave again? What if she gets used to having you here, and then you decide it's too much, too complicated, too... Natasha. Alan set down his coffee and stepped closer, close enough to see the gold flecks in her brown eyes, close enough to smell her perfume beneath the hospital antiseptic. Look at me. She raised her eyes to his, and he saw everything there, fear and hope and love and desperate, bone-deep exhaustion. I left my company's biggest crisis of the year to be here with our daughter, because you needed me to. I slept on your couch and checked for monsters under the bed, and learned how to fold fitted sheets your way because that's what family does. I'm not going anywhere. Tears started sliding down her cheeks, and Alan gently wiped them away with his thumbs. I'm so tired, she whispered. Tired of being strong all the time, tired of making all the decisions alone, tired of wondering if I'm enough for her, if I'm doing everything right. You are enough. You're more than enough, Alan said softly. Look at what you've built together. Look at the incredible little girl you've raised. You've been everything to her. But what if I don't have to be everything anymore? The question came out so quietly he almost missed it. What if I could trust someone else to share that responsibility? Then stop carrying it all alone. Let me help. Let me be part of this. For a moment they stood frozen in the kitchen, the morning light streaming through windows, the coffee growing cold on the counter, 7 years of hurt and hope hanging in the balance between them. Then Natasha stepped forward and buried her face in Alan's chest, and he wrapped his arms around her, holding her together as she finally allowed herself to fall apart. I'm so scared, she sobbed into his shirt. I'm scared of trusting you, and I'm scared of not trusting you, and I'm scared that I'm falling in love with you all over again. Alan's heart soared even as he felt her tears soaking through his shirt. I'm scared too, he admitted. Scared that I don't deserve this second chance, scared that I'll mess it up again, scared that what I feel for you and Rahama is so big it might consume me. They held each other in the quiet kitchen, breathing together, hearts beating together, finding their rhythm after 7 years of being out of sync. Mama? Rahama's voice came from the hallway, thick with sleep. Are you home? Natasha and Alan broke apart, but slowly, reluctantly. She wiped her eyes quickly and turned toward their daughter's voice. I'm home, baby. I'm home. Rahama appeared in the kitchen doorway in her dinosaur pajamas, her hair sticking up at odd angles, and immediately noticed the emotional charge in the room. Were you crying, Mama? She asked with 6-year-old directness. Happy tears, Natasha said, kneeling down to hug her. Sometimes grown-ups cry happy tears when they realize how lucky they are. Are we lucky? Rahama asked, looking between her parents with hopeful eyes. Alan met Natasha's gaze over their daughter's head, seeing his own overwhelming love reflected there. We're very lucky, he said, his voice rough with emotion. The luckiest family in the world. As they sat down to breakfast together, Alan making pancakes while Natasha and Rahama set the table, Alan felt the last piece of his broken heart click into place. This was what he'd been searching for in every boardroom, every success, every achievement that had felt hollow. He'd been searching for home, and home was wherever Natasha and Rahama were, whether it was a modest apartment or a blanket fort, or the middle of a crisis at 6 in the morning. For the first time in 7 years, Alan knew exactly where he belonged. Chapter 9. The Almost. 2 weeks later, Natasha found herself standing in front of her bedroom mirror, second-guessing everything about the black dress she'd chosen for dinner at Alan's penthouse. Rahama was spending the night at her best friend Zara's house, the first sleepover Natasha had agreed to in months, and only because Alan had suggested they needed time to talk. Really talk. About where they were heading, about what was happening between them, about the future they might build together. The dress was elegant but not too formal, sophisticated but not trying too hard. At least that's what she'd thought when she'd bought it 3 years ago for a medical conference. Now, looking at her reflection, she wondered if it sent the wrong message or the right message, or if she was overthinking everything because her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "You can do this," she whispered to her reflection. "It's just dinner. Just conversation. Just Alan. Just Alan." As if there had ever been anything simple about Alan Hubler. The drive to his penthouse gave her time to think, to remember how they'd gotten to this moment. The past month had been a careful choreography of family dinners, school pickups, lazy Sunday mornings, and late-night conversations after Rahama had gone to bed. Alan had proven himself in small ways and large ones, never missing a promise to their daughter, showing up when they needed him, putting their family first in ways that still took Natasha's breath away. But tonight felt different. Tonight, Rahama wasn't there as a buffer, as a safe focus for their attention. Tonight, they would have to confront what was growing between them without the comfortable distraction of parenting duties. Alan's building was everything she'd expected, sleek, modern, intimidatingly expensive. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt like ascending to another world, one where men in $1,000 suits made million-dollar decisions and where girls from modest backgrounds had no business belonging. When the elevator opened directly into his penthouse, Natasha's breath caught. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Seattle's skyline, the city lights twinkling like earthbound stars. The space was beautifully appointed but somehow sterile, like a magazine spread rather than a home. "You came," Alan said, appearing from what she assumed was the kitchen. He'd changed from his usual business attire into dark jeans and a soft gray sweater that hugged his broad shoulders, and Natasha felt her mouth go dry at the sight of him. "I said I would," she replied, handing him the bottle of wine she'd brought. "Your home is impressive." Alan looked around as if seeing the space through her eyes. "It's not home," he said quietly. "Home is your kitchen table on Sunday mornings. Home is wherever you and Rahama are." The simple honesty of his words made her chest tight with emotion. "Alan, come here," he said, taking her hand and leading her to the windows. "Look at this view. Do you know what I see when I look out there?" Natasha studied the glittering cityscape spread below them. "Success? Achievement? Your empire?" "Emptiness," Alan said softly. 7 years of building something that looks impressive from the outside, but means nothing without the right people to share it with. He turned to face her, his green eyes intense in the dim lighting. "I bought this place thinking it would prove I'd made it, that I'd become someone worthy of love. Instead, it just became a very expensive reminder of everything I'd lost." Before Natasha could respond, Alan led her to the kitchen where he'd prepared dinner himself. Not catered, not ordered from an expensive restaurant, but actually cooked. The intimacy of it, seeing this powerful man who commanded boardrooms, carefully plating pasta and checking the oven, made her heart flutter. You cooked, she said, surprised. I've had a lot of lonely evenings to learn, Alan replied with a self-deprecating smile. Plus, I wanted tonight to be personal, real, not some corporate performance. They ate by candlelight at his dining room table, the city spread out below them like a blanket of stars. The conversation flowed easily, touching on everything and nothing. Rahama's latest engineering project, Natasha's work at the hospital, shared memories from their college days, dreams for the future. Remember our first real date? Alan asked over dessert. Tiramisu that he'd somehow managed not to ruin. The Natural History Museum. You were so nervous, Natasha laughed, the wine making her feel warm and relaxed. You kept talking about market projections to cover up the fact that you were terrified I'd reject you. I was terrified, Alan admitted. You were so far out of my league it wasn't even funny. Beautiful, brilliant, kind, everything I'd ever dreamed of but never thought I deserved. And now, Alan reached across the table to take her hand. Now I know I don't deserve you, but I'm hoping you'll give me the chance to earn the right to try. After dinner, Alan led her to the living room where he'd set up a playlist on his sound system. The first song that filled the air made Natasha's breath catch. At Last by Etta James, the song they'd danced to in his tiny apartment kitchen 7 years ago when they'd been young and in love and convinced they had forever. Dance with me, Alan said, extending his hand. Natasha hesitated for just a moment before accepting, and then she was in his arms, swaying to music that carried the weight of their entire history. Alan held her carefully at first, as if she might break or disappear, but gradually they moved closer together until there was no space between them. I missed this, Natasha whispered against his chest, breathing in the scent that was uniquely him, expensive cologne mixed with something warm and masculine that made her head spin. I missed everything about you, Alan replied, his voice rough with emotion. The way you hum when you're concentrating, the way you laugh at your own jokes, the way you fit perfectly in my arms like you were made for me. They danced through 3 songs, holding each other in the dim light of his living room, 7 years of separation melting away with each step. When Alan tilted her chin up to look at him, Natasha saw her own desperate longing reflected in his eyes. Natasha, he whispered, her name a prayer on his lips. I know, she breathed, rising on her tiptoes as he lowered his head. Their first kiss in 7 years was everything, tender and desperate, sweet and hungry, full of apology and forgiveness and promise. Natasha felt herself melting into him, her carefully constructed walls crumbling under the assault of sensation and memory and overwhelming love. I love you, Alan whispered against her lips. I never stopped loving you. I love you too, she admitted, the words torn from her heart. God help me, I love you too. What followed was inevitable, beautiful, devastating in its perfection. Alan made love to her with a reverence that brought tears to her eyes, worshipping her body as if she were sacred, as if he were trying to memorize every curve and hollow, every whispered endearment. 7 years of longing poured into every touch, every kiss, every moment of rediscovered intimacy. Later, curled against his chest in his king-sized bed, Natasha felt more complete than she had since the day he'd left. Alan's arms around her, his heart beating steadily beneath her cheek, the warmth of his skin against hers. It was like coming home after a long, painful journey. Stay, Alan whispered into her hair. Stay forever. I'm here, she whispered back, and for that perfect moment it felt like forever was possible. But morning came with cruel clarity, sunshine streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows that offered no privacy, no shelter from the harsh reality of what they'd done. Natasha woke in Alan's arms, surrounded by luxury that felt cold and foreign, and panic began to creep in around the edges of her contentment. Alan was still sleeping, his face peaceful in the morning light, looking younger than his 35 years. He was beautiful, successful, powerful, everything any woman could want. But as Natasha looked around his sterile penthouse at the evidence of a life built on ambition and achievement, doubt began to poison the perfect memory of their night together. What was she doing? She was a single mother with a modest apartment and a daughter who depended on her completely. What place did she have in this world of corporate power and endless ambition? What happened when the novelty of playing house wore off, when reality intruded, when Alan remembered that he was a tech mogul worth hundreds of millions, and she was just a doctor from a working-class background? "Good morning, beautiful," Alan murmured, his eyes opening to find her watching him. "Good morning," she replied, but something in her tone made his expression shift from contentment to concern. "What's wrong?" Natasha sat up, pulling the sheet around herself, suddenly feeling exposed in ways that had nothing to do with nudity. This is a lot to process." Alan sat up too, reaching for her, but she pulled back slightly. "Natasha, talk to me. What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that last night was incredible, but morning always comes, and in the morning you're still Alan Hubler, tech mogul worth hundreds of millions, and I'm still a single mother who lives paycheck to paycheck and whose idea of luxury is buying name-brand cereal." "Money doesn't matter." "It does matter," Natasha interrupted, her voice growing strained. "Maybe not to you because you have so much of it that you can't even imagine what it's like without it. But I live in the real world, Alan. I have a daughter to protect, a life to maintain, responsibilities that don't disappear just because we spent one perfect night together." Alan looked stricken. "You think this was just one night for me? I think you want it to be more. I think you believe it can be more. But what happens when your board of directors calls with the next big opportunity? What happens when someone offers you a deal you can't refuse, or a chance to expand globally, or—" "I turned down Tokyo," Alan said firmly. "I told you that. This time. But what about next time? What about the time after that?" Natasha's voice broke slightly. "I can't go through losing you again, Alan. And I can't put Rahama through that either. She's already getting attached to you, already starting to see you as her father. If you leave again, I won't leave again. You don't know that. You can't promise that." Natasha climbed out of bed, reaching for her dress from the night before. "People make promises with the best intentions, but when push comes to shove, when business conflicts with personal life, you've already shown me which one wins. That was 7 years ago. I was a different man." "Were you?" Natasha spun around to face him, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Because this penthouse, this lifestyle, the corporate empire you've built, it all suggests that you're exactly the same man, just with more zeros in your bank account." Alan got out of bed, reaching for his clothes, his expression desperate. "You're scared. I understand that. But don't let fear destroy what we found again." "I'm not just scared, Alan. I'm realistic. I'm a mother who has to think about what's best for her child, not just what feels good in the moment." Natasha finished dressing with shaking hands. "Last night it was everything I remembered and more. But love isn't enough. It wasn't enough 7 years ago, and it's not enough now." "Then what is enough?" Alan's voice was raw with pain. "What do I have to do to prove that you and Rahama are my priority?" Natasha looked at him for a long moment, seeing the man she loved with all her heart, seeing the father their daughter was already beginning to adore, seeing the future she wanted so desperately but was too afraid to reach for. "I don't know," she whispered honestly. "I don't know if anything is enough to heal this kind of hurt." She left him standing in his penthouse bedroom, surrounded by luxury and success, and everything he'd thought he wanted, alone again with the devastating realization that having everything meant nothing if you didn't have the right person to share it with. As the elevator descended toward the parking garage, Natasha closed her eyes and tried to remember the feeling of being held, of being loved, of being part of something bigger than herself. But all she could think about was protecting her daughter from the kind of heartbreak that had taken her 7 years to survive. Some wounds, she thought, were too deep to heal completely. Some trust, once broken, could never be fully restored. But as she drove home through the Seattle morning, Natasha couldn't shake the memory of Alan's face when she'd left, the devastation there, the love that had burned so brightly in his eyes even as she'd walked away. Maybe some risks were worth taking, even when the potential for heartbreak was enormous. Maybe some love was worth fighting for, even when the odds seemed impossible. Maybe. Chapter 10. The Reunion That Changes Everything. 3 days passed in excruciating silence. 3 days where Alan stared at his phone 1,000 times, typing messages to Natasha that he never sent. Where he lay awake at night replaying every moment of their perfect evening and devastating morning. On the 4th day, his phone rang with the call that would crystallize everything. "Alan, we need an answer." Harrison Blackwell's voice carried the authority of a man accustomed to getting his way. "The Yamamoto Group's offer expires tomorrow. 800 million cash, with a 2-year consulting contract requiring your relocation to Tokyo. This is the culmination of everything we've built." Alan stared out his office window at the Seattle skyline, seeing not the city he'd conquered, but the family he stood to lose again. "I need time to think about it." "Time to think?" Harrison's voice sharpened with disbelief. "Alan, this is an $800 million offer. What's to think about?" "Everything," Alan thought. "The only things that truly matter." "Give me until 5 o'clock, he said. "That's cutting it close," Harrison warned. "Don't let personal complications cloud your business judgment, Alan. This is about your legacy." After hanging up, Alan sat in his corner office and felt nothing but emptiness. $800 million. More money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. The validation of every sacrifice he'd made, every relationship he'd damaged, every night he'd chosen work over life. And all he could think about was Rahama's laugh, Natasha's tears, and the way home felt like their kitchen table on Sunday mornings. His assistant buzzed through the intercom. "Mr. Hubler, there's a call for you from Roosevelt Elementary. They said it's about Rahama Davis and that you're listed as an emergency contact." Alan's heart stopped. "Put them through." "Mr. Hubler, this is Ms. Rodriguez, Rahama's teacher. There's nothing wrong," she said quickly, "but Rahama asked me to call you. She said she needed to talk to you about something very important before tomorrow's science fair, and she was quite insistent that it couldn't wait. Is Natasha, Dr. Davis, available? She's in emergency surgery and unreachable. Rahama suggested I ask if you could pick her up from school. She said you'd understand why it was important." 20 minutes later, Alan found himself in the Roosevelt Elementary principal's office, with Rahama sitting across from him, her small hands folded in her lap, her expression serious beyond her years. "Thank you for coming," she said solemnly. "I know grown-ups are very busy, but I needed to talk to you about something important." Alan knelt down to her level, his heart breaking at the serious expression on her little face. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Rahama reached into her backpack and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, a flyer for her school's science fair. "The science fair is tomorrow, and I finished my project. It's really good, and I worked really hard on it, and—" Her voice began to waver. "And I wanted to invite you to come see it." Alan felt his chest tighten. "Of course I'll come. I wouldn't miss it for anything." "But that's not the important part," Rahama continued, her green eyes, his eyes, serious beyond her years. "The important part is that Jimmy Castellanos said his daddy can't come to the science fair because he has to go to Tokyo for work, and Jimmy is really sad about it." Alan's blood ran cold. Tokyo? Yeah. And then I got scared because what if you have to go to Tokyo too? What if you disappear again like you did before I was born? Tears started sliding down her cheeks. I heard Mama crying last night, and I think she's scared too. I think she's scared that you're going to choose work over us again. The words hit Alan like a physical blow. His 6-year-old daughter had articulated the exact choice he was facing. Rahama, he said softly, taking her small hands in his. Can I tell you something very important? She nodded, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. I did choose work over you and your mama once, a long time ago, and it was the biggest mistake of my entire life. I missed the first 6 years of your life because I thought building a company was more important than building a family. I was wrong, so wrong that it took me 7 years to understand just how wrong I was. So you won't go to Tokyo? Alan looked into his daughter's face, this perfect, brilliant, beautiful child who was half his DNA and all his heart, and felt the last piece of his broken soul click into place. I won't go anywhere, he said firmly. Not Tokyo, not anywhere. You and your mama are my home now, and I'm never leaving home again. Rahama threw her arms around his neck, and Alan held her tight, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo and feeling more successful than any business deal had ever made him feel. Actually, Alan said, could you give me a few more minutes? I need to make a very important phone call, and I'd like Rahama to hear it. He dialed Harrison Blackwell's number while his daughter watched with curious eyes. Harrison, it's Alan. I've made my decision about the Tokyo deal. Excellent. I knew you'd come to your senses. When do you want to? I'm declining the offer. The silence stretched. I'm sorry, did you say declining? Harrison's voice was dangerously quiet. I'm declining the offer, withdrawing from the Tokyo negotiations, and stepping back from day-to-day operations of the company. I'm promoting Jessica Chen to CEO and transitioning to a consulting role that will allow me to focus on my family. Have you lost your mind? This is $800 million. This is my life, Alan said calmly, his eyes never leaving Rahama's amazed face. And my life is worth more than $800 million. He hung up and turned his full attention to his daughter. What does that mean? Rahama asked. It means that tomorrow at your science fair, when you look into the audience, I'll be there. It means that when you have soccer games or piano recitals or college graduation, I'll be there. It means that you'll never have to wonder if your daddy is going to choose work over you, because the answer will always be you. Rahama launched herself into his arms again, and Alan held her close, feeling like he'd just made the most profitable deal of his career. The next day, Alan arrived at Rahama's elementary school with his heart pounding and a small velvet box in his pocket. The same ring he'd bought 7 years ago. The school gymnasium buzzed with excited children and proud parents admiring science projects. Alan found Rahama's project easily, a sophisticated mechanical heart that pumped red liquid through clear tubes, demonstrating circulation while explaining the emotional connection between physical and metaphorical hearts. It's called How Hearts Heal, Rahama explained to a group of impressed judges. See, when a heart is broken, like when someone leaves, it still keeps pumping blood, but it pumps sadness too. But when love comes back, the heart gets stronger and pumps happiness instead. Alan felt tears prick his eyes as he watched his brilliant daughter explain the very journey their family had taken. That's a very advanced understanding of cardiac function, one judge commented. Where did you learn so much about hearts? My mama is a heart doctor, Rahama said proudly. And my daddy taught me that the most important thing about hearts is that they never stop trying to love, even when they're hurt. Your daddy sounds very wise, the judge said. He is, Rahama agreed. He used to make mistakes, but now he knows that love is more important than work. Alan scanned the crowd and finally spotted Natasha near the back of the gymnasium. She was watching Rahama with undisguised pride, but when her eyes met Alan's across the room, he saw uncertainty there, fear, hope, and love all tangled together. As the judging concluded, Alan made his way to Natasha's side. "Her project is incredible," he said quietly. "She worked on it for weeks," Natasha replied, her voice carefully neutral. "She wanted it to be perfect. Like her mother." They stood in awkward silence, the weight of their unfinished conversation hanging between them. "Ladies and gentlemen," the principal's voice came over the microphone, "it's time to announce our science fair winners." Rahama placed second in her grade level, and Alan cheered so loudly that other parents turned to look at him. When Rahama ran toward them with her ribbon, Alan scooped her up and spun her around. "I'm so proud of you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're the smartest, most amazing scientist I know." "I couldn't have done it without my research assistants," Rahama said solemnly, looking between Alan and Natasha. "Science is better when you work as a team." Alan set her down and took a deep breath. The gymnasium was still full of families celebrating, but in this moment, the only people who mattered were the two standing in front of him. "Natasha," he said, his voice carrying across the noise of the crowd, "I need to tell you something." She looked at him warily. "Alan, if this is about the other night—" "This is about the rest of our lives," he interrupted, reaching into his pocket. "This is about choosing love over everything else, every single day, for the rest of time." He dropped to one knee right there in the elementary school gymnasium, in front of Rahama's award-winning heart project, surrounded by curious families and the beautiful chaos of real life. "Natasha Davis," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. "7 years ago, I was too scared and too stupid to choose you. I chose ambition over love, success over family, fear over faith. Yesterday, I was offered $800 million to repeat that mistake." Natasha's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. "I turned it down," Alan continued, pulling out the ring that had waited 7 years for this moment. "I turned it down because I realized that I already have everything I could ever want. I have a daughter who sees the world with wonder and builds robots that can detect when someone needs ice cream. I have a woman who saves lives every day and somehow found enough love in her heart to give me a second chance I don't deserve." Tears were streaming down Natasha's face now, and around them the noise of the gymnasium had quieted as people began to realize what was happening. "I love you, Natasha. I love you and Rahama more than life itself, more than success, more than anything this world could offer me. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that love is the only choice that matters?" The silence in the gymnasium was deafening. Alan's heart hammered against his ribs as he waited for Natasha's answer. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, yes, yes." The gymnasium erupted in cheers as Alan slipped the ring onto Natasha's finger and pulled her into his arms for a kiss that tasted like forgiveness and forever, and coming home after a long journey. "Group hug," Rahama announced, wrapping her arms around both of them, and Alan thought his heart might burst from the sheer joy of it all. 6 months later. The wedding was everything they'd dreamed of. Instead of a grand affair, they chose the same coffee shop where they'd first met, where they'd rekindled their love, where their story had truly begun. Rahama served as both maid of honor and ring-bearer, wearing a yellow dress that perfectly matched her sunny personality and carrying rings tied to Bridge the robot, whom she'd insisted should be part of the ceremony. "Do you, Alan, take Natasha to be your wife, to love and cherish, to choose every day for the rest of your life?" the officiant asked. "I do," Alan said, his voice steady and sure. I choose her today, tomorrow, and every day after that. Do you, Natasha, take Alan to be your husband, to trust and forgive, to build a future together? Natasha looked at the man who'd broken her heart and spent months earning it back, who'd chosen love over fortune, who'd proven that some people could change. I do, she said, her voice full of joy. I choose love. I choose us. I choose our family. When they kissed as husband and wife, with their daughter cheering and their friends applauding, and the coffee shop around them full of love and laughter, Alan knew he'd finally found what he'd been searching for all along. Success wasn't measured in dollars or market share or corporate acquisitions. Success was measured in the trust of a 6-year-old girl who called him daddy. Success was measured in the love of a woman who'd given him a second chance at everything that mattered. And as they danced their first dance as a married couple to At Last, while Rahama giggled and worked on robot sketches at a nearby table, Alan realized that he'd finally learned the most important lesson of his life. Love was the only investment that always paid dividends. Love was the only empire worth building. Love was the only success that truly mattered. And he was, at last, truly rich.